The desert breathed first. It exhaled heat and dust and the low hush of cicadas settling into evening, the kind of sound that made a man aware of his own lungs. The sun slid down behind the mesas like it was tired of looking at what it had made. Red bled into gold, gold into shadow. Lenora May Carter stood on the porch of the small boarding house at the edge of Dry Creek and breathed like she had every right to. She didn't rush it, didn't hide it. Her chest rose slow and full beneath the cotton of her dress, the fabric pulling just enough to remind anyone looking that her body took up space and did not apologize for it. The breath went in, then out. Across the dirt street, Boone Walker froze mid-step. He was a giant of a man, 6.5 feet of bone and muscle, shoulders wide enough to block a doorway without trying, sunburned neck, pale hair darkened with sweat, a white cowboy with hands built for breaking horses and lifting things that didn't want to be lifted. He'd come into Dry Creek to collect a debt. He stayed because a woman was breathing. Boone's boots settled into the dust, unmoving. His jaw tightened as if something in him had been caught by the ribs. He wasn't staring on purpose. He wasn't even fully aware he'd stopped walking, but he was watching her. Lenora leaned against the porch rail, one thick arm resting easy, the other hand wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold. Her skin was deep brown, kissed by sun and life, her figure full and grounded like the land itself. She wore no corset tonight, no pinched waist, just a loose dress that moved when she moved and stayed when she didn't. She tipped her head back slightly and closed her eyes. Another breath. Boone swallowed. It wasn't lust that hit him first. It was something sharper, more unsettling, like watching a storm roll in when you didn't know if your house would stand. He'd seen women before, plenty of them. He'd wanted some, avoided others, broken a few hearts without meaning to. But this felt like trespassing, like he was seeing something private. Lenora opened her eyes and looked straight at him, not startled, not shy, just aware. The moment stretched, thin and dangerous. "You plan on standing there all night, or you got business in town?" Her voice was low and smooth. Boone cleared his throat. The sound came out rougher than he intended. "Business," he said. His voice was deep, worn from smoke and silence. It didn't carry far, but it reached her. Lenora hummed, unimpressed. "That's what all men say." A corner of her mouth lifted. Not a smile, not quite. Something knowing. Boone shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the heat trapped under his hat, the dust on his coat, the way his pulse had started hammering for no damn reason. "I'm looking for the owner of this place." Lenora took another slow sip of coffee, eyes never leaving him. "You found her." That landed. Boone blinked. "You?" She nodded once. "Me." Silence followed, thick as molasses. Boone's gaze flicked, just for a second, to the rail where her hand rested, to the strength in her forearm, to the steady rise and fall of her chest again. He dragged his eyes back up, scolding himself too late. "I didn't mean—" He stopped, started again. "Didn't expect." Her brow arched. "What, someone like me?" He winced because she'd named it clean. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." Lenora set the mug down and straightened, stepping closer to the edge of the porch. The boards creaked under her weight, announcing her presence like they respected it. Boone stayed where he was. She was closer now, close enough he could see the faint scar near her collarbone, close enough to notice how her breathing never faltered, never hitched, even with him standing there staring like a fool. "What's your business, cowboy?" Boone asked. "Boone Walker," he said automatically. "I run cattle north of the ridge." She nodded. Lenora May Carter. Her name settled into him like it had always been there. I was told there was an outstanding note on the land, he continued. Lenora's eyes didn't leave his face. There was. And it's been paid. Boone frowned. That's not what... I know what you were told, she said calmly. Men like you usually hear what they expect. The words weren't sharp. They were matter of fact. That somehow cut deeper. Boone exhaled through his nose, slow. He realized then that he was mirroring her breathing without meaning to. In, out, trying to steady something inside his chest that hadn't acted up in years. I don't doubt you, he said after a moment. Just need proof. Lenora studied him, really studied him like she was weighing not just his words, but the man carrying them. Finally, she turned. Then come inside, she said, and I'll show you. She paused at the door and looked back over her shoulder. And Boone. Yes, ma'am? Her gaze dipped, deliberate now, to his chest where his breath had gone shallow. If you're going to watch me breathe, she said softly, you might want to remember how to do it. Then she went inside, leaving the door open. Boone stood in the dust, heart pounding, the desert suddenly too quiet. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure who was collecting whose debt.
The boarding house smelled like cedar oil and warm bread. Boone ducked instinctively as he stepped inside, his shoulders nearly brushing the doorframe. The space wasn't small, but he was too big for most rooms, too much man for corners and narrow halls. His presence shifted the air, like a storm cloud squeezing into shelter. Lenora didn't look back to see if he followed. She knew. Her boots moved slow across the worn wooden floor, the boards answering her weight with familiar creaks. Lamps glowed low in amber, throwing soft light across framed photographs on the walls. Family, land, women standing proud with sleeves rolled up and eyes sharp. Boone noticed everything. He always did. It was how you survived. But what he noticed most was how close he suddenly was to her. Too close. Not touching, not yet, but the space between them felt charged, like a held breath waiting to break. Door, Lenora said without turning. He shut it carefully, the click loud in the quiet room. The sound seemed to seal them in. She crossed to a small desk near the window and reached for a stack of papers, movements unhurried. Boone leaned against the wall opposite, arms folded loosely, watching the way her dress shifted with every step, the way her back rose and fell, steady as tidewater. He clenched his jaw. Here, she said, sliding a folded note across the desk. Receipt, ledger, signature. Boone pushed off the wall and stepped closer. The distance shrank to nothing. He could smell her now, soap and coffee, and something warm underneath it, something human. His chest expanded without permission. The air felt thicker, harder to draw. Lenora noticed. Of course she did. She didn't comment, just waited. Boone picked up the papers, eyes scamming automatically, but the numbers blurred. His attention kept pulling back to her, to the quiet strength in her stance, to the way she took up space like she'd earned every inch of it. It's all here, he said finally. I know. He nodded, folding the papers again. He should have left. Any sensible man would have. Debt cleared, business done. But his feet didn't move. Instead, he asked, You run this place alone? Lenora's eyes flicked up, sharp but not offended. No. No? He echoed. My sisters help when they can. Women from town rent rooms. We look after each other. That landed somewhere deep in him. He'd been raised around men who believed strength was solitary, earned through silence and sore muscles. This felt different. Not easy, he said. No, she agreed, but it's mine. She stepped past him then, close enough that her arm brushed his sleeve, just once. The contact was brief, accidental in appearance only.
Boone sucked in a breath like he'd been struck. Lenora felt it. She stopped. Slowly she turned to face him. Up close, she was impossible to ignore. Her presence filled the room without noise. Her eyes were dark and steady, her expression unreadable but attentive, like she was listening for something inside him he hadn't spoken aloud. "You all right there, Cowboy?" she asked. He nodded once, too quick. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled then, not sweet, not teasing, curious. "You keep calling me that," she said, "like you're trying to remember your place." Boone's throat worked. "Habit." She stepped closer. Not enough to touch, enough to make the space between them undeniable. Habits can be unlearned. The air between them tightened. Boone had faced down angry men, charging cattle, storms that split the sky. None of it prepared him for the way her nearness unsettled him, the way his body responded without asking his mind for permission. "You always stand this close?" he asked, voice low. Lenora tilted her head. "Only when someone's pretending not to feel it." He huffed a quiet laugh, short and disbelieving. "You don't miss much," she said softly. "No, I don't." Silence stretched again, heavier this time. Boone was acutely aware of his breathing, too loud, too shallow. He forced it slower, deeper, trying to match the rhythm she kept so effortlessly. She noticed that, too. Her gaze dropped to his chest, then rose back to his eyes. "Better," she murmured. That did it. Boone's hands flexed at his sides, every instinct screaming to either step back or step closer, to claim space or surrender it. He chose neither, standing like the ground beneath him had rooted his boots in place. "You enjoy this," he said quietly. Lenora didn't deny it. "I enjoy honesty." "And what's honest right now?" She studied him for a long moment, then spoke with careful precision. "You're a man used to being large in the world, and you don't know what to do when you don't feel like the biggest thing in the room." The truth hit hard. Boone exhaled slowly. "You make a habit of reading people, too?" "Only the ones who stare at me like I'm a problem they want to solve." He met her gaze, unflinching. "You're not a problem." "No, I'm a fact." Another pause. This one vibrated. Somewhere outside, a horse snorted. The desert shifted. Life went on. Inside, something hovered on the edge of crossing. Boone stepped back first, just one pace. "Thank you for the papers," he said, voice steadying. "I won't trouble you again." Lenora's expression didn't change, but something warm flickered behind her eyes. "We'll see," she said. He turned for the door, pulse still thundering, lungs working harder than they should. As he reached for the handle, her voice followed him. "Boone." He stopped. "Yes?" "Next time you come by," she said calmly, "try breathing before you knock." The door opened, closed. Boone stepped back into the desert night, chest burning, mind unsteady. Behind him, Lenora stood in the lamplight, breathing easy and smiling.
Boone Walker did not return to Dry Creek for 3 days. Not because he didn't want to, because wanting had never scared him like this. The first night, he rode hard past sundown, pushing his horse farther north than usual, lungs burning with cold air and stubborn denial. He told himself Lenora May Carter was a complication, nothing more. A woman who knew how to look at a man until he remembered he had a body. A woman who breathed like she didn't owe the world quiet. The second night, he lay awake on his bunk, staring at the beams overhead, counting breaths that refused to slow. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her on that porch, saw the rise of her chest, heard her voice telling him to remember how. The third morning, he lost the fight. The sun was barely up when Boone saddled his horse and turned south. He told himself it was practical. He needed to confirm the ledger with the county clerk. Dry Creek was on the way.
He wasn't riding back for her. The lie barely made it out of his mouth. By the time the boarding house came into view, the heat was already settling in, thick and intimate. The porch was empty this time, shadows pooled where Lenora had stood before. Boone felt a strange disappointment at that, sharp and immediate. He dismounted anyway. The door was open. Voices drifted out, women laughing, the low clatter of dishes. Boone paused, suddenly aware of how large he was again, how much space he took when he entered places that weren't built for him. Then Lenora appeared in the doorway. She wore a different dress today, darker fabric, sleeves rolled to her elbows. There was flour on her forearm, a smudge near her wrist like evidence of work being done. She stopped short when she saw him. Her gaze flicked, quick and assessing, then settled. "Well," she said, "you remembered how." Boone tipped his hat. "Morning." "You're breathing," she observed. "Trying to." That earned him a quiet smile. "Come in," she said, stepping aside, "before you block the light." Inside, the boarding house felt livelier than before. Two women sat at the table shelling beans. Another moved past with a basket of linens. They glanced up at Boone with open curiosity. Not fear, not awe, just interest. Boone noticed his tension. "They won't bite," she said under her breath, "unless you earn it." "I'm not used to being stared at," he murmured. That made her laugh. Not loud, genuine. "That's a lie. You're just not used to it not meaning power." The words struck clean. She gestured toward the back hallway. "Walk with me." Boone followed, ducking instinctively again, shoulders brushing the narrow walls. The hallway opened into a small office. Same desk, same lamp, sunlight cutting through the window at a softer angle now. Lenora leaned back against the desk instead of standing behind it, a deliberate choice. "So, what's your excuse today?" He considered lying again, decided against it. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." Her brow lifted slightly. "That so?" "And it bothered me," he added. "That part makes sense." Boone huffed a breath. "I don't like being thrown off." Lenora folded her arms, her posture relaxed but grounded. "Neither do I. Difference is, I learned not to punish people for it." He met her gaze. "I don't want to punish you." "I know." That certainty rattled him. She stepped closer, slow and measured, until the space between them closed again. Not touching, not yet. The air shifted, heavy with awareness. "You watch me like you're waiting for permission," she said quietly. "Am I?" Her eyes searched his face. "From yourself." Boone swallowed. His chest expanded, breath deep and deliberate this time. "I don't know how to be small." "You don't need to be, just present." She reached out then, not to his chest, not to his hands, but to his sleeve, fingers warm, steady, resting there like she was testing something solid. He didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't breathe until she did. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Outside, someone called Lenora's name. She didn't look away from Boone when she answered. "In a moment." The hand dropped. The connection lingered. "This," she said softly, gesturing between them, "is not something I rush." "I'm not asking you to," Boone said. That was the truth. He wasn't asking for anything. He was standing in it, letting it exist. Lenora studied him again, then nodded once, as if a decision had been quietly made. "Good," she said. "Then you can stay for supper." Boone blinked. "That's not rushing?" "That's feeding a man who rode back 3 days later pretending he had business. We'll call it neighborly." A smile tugged at his mouth before he could stop it. "I can accept neighborly." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Boone?" "Yes?" "If you're going to keep coming back," she said, "you'll need to learn something." "What's that?" "How to stand close without trying to claim what isn't offered." Boone followed her out of the office, heart steady and unsteady all at once. For For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to be larger than the moment. He was letting it hold him.
Supper stretched longer than Boone expected. Not because the food was slow coming, Lenora's kitchen ran with practiced ease, but because time behaved differently when he was there. The light shifted from gold to amber to deepening blue outside the windows, and still he stayed, seated at the long table with women who spoke plainly and laughed without asking permission. Lenora moved among them like gravity. She checked pots, poured water, corrected someone's teasing with a raised brow. She never hurried, never shrank. Boone watched her the way a man watched a river he suspected could carry him somewhere he wasn't ready to name. She caught him once. "Eat," she said, sliding a plate toward him without looking. "Staring doesn't fill a man." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, and this time the title held warmth instead of defense. The food was simple, beans, bread, roasted meat, but it grounded him, anchored him in his body instead of his head. By the time plates were cleared and the others drifted away, the house had quieted into a low, intimate hum. Lantern light replaced lamps. Lenora leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "You don't have to go yet." Boone paused near the doorway. "You sure? I wouldn't say it if I wasn't." He stayed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, expectant, the kind that invited truth if you were brave enough to offer it. "You ever been married?" Lenora asked. "No, came close once." "What happened?" He considered the question, then answered honestly. "She wanted me bigger than I already was, louder, more." Lenora nodded slowly. "And you?" "I wanted rest. I didn't know how to ask for it." Her gaze softened. "Men like you rarely do." She pushed off the counter and moved closer, stopping a careful distance away, close enough now that Boone could feel her warmth without touching, close enough that his breath slowed on its own. "You ever been wanted," she asked, "for how steady you are instead of how strong?" The question landed heavy. "No," he said. Lenora's expression shifted, not pity, not sadness, recognition. "Well," she said quietly, "that explains a few things." She reached past him then, fingers brushing his wrist as she took a cloth from the hook by the door. The touch was brief, almost incidental. It wasn't enough. Boone's breath caught before he could stop it. Lenora froze. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head and looked at his hand, still hovering near where her fingers had been. Then she looked up at his face. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "You're breathing like you're bracing for impact." He let out a shaky huff. "Hard habit to break." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "Come here." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. Boone stepped closer. This time there was no space left between them. Not touching, but barely. Lenora placed her hand flat against his chest. Not pushing, not claiming, feeling. His heart thundered under her palm, a wild, undeniable thing. "Slow," she murmured. He followed her lead, drawing air deep into his lungs, letting it out in a controlled exhale. Again, again. Her hand stayed where it was, steady as an anchor. "There," she said softly. "That's better." His voice came out rough. "You always this good at this?" "Listening?" "Yes." Her hand slid just slightly, then stilled again. The movement sent a jolt through him, sharp and electric. Boone fought the instinct to reach for her, to close the distance fully. Instead, he stayed. Lenora's gaze lifted to his mouth. Not hunger, assessment. "You touch like a man who knows what his hands can do, but you stop like you're afraid to be wrong." "I don't want to hurt you," Boone said quietly. The honesty in it surprised them both. Lenora met his eyes. "I won't break." "I know. That's not what scares me." That earned a slow, thoughtful smile. She removed her hand from his chest and stepped back half a pace, reclaiming her space. Boone felt the absence like a sudden chill. "Boone," Lenora said, voice calm but firm, "I don't offer pieces of myself to men who want to conquer them. I don't want to conquer you." "I know," she said again. "That's why you're still standing here." Silence fell, thick and intimate. Outside, the desert wind stirred, carrying the promise of a storm that hadn't arrived yet. Lenora turned towards the hallway. "I need to lock up." Boone nodded, grounding himself. "I should go." She paused, hand on the doorframe, then looked back at him. "You can, or you can walk me to the porch." He followed. The night air wrapped around him, cooler now, alive with the smell of dust and coming rain. They stood side by side, close but not touching, looking out over the quiet street. Lenora leaned on the rail, breathing easy. Boone matched her pace without thinking. After a long moment, she spoke. "You don't scare me, Boone Walker." He swallowed. "You scare me." Her laughter was soft, pleased. "Good." She turned her head just enough to look at him. "That means you're paying attention." They stood there, breathing the same night air, the heat between them no longer sharp, but deep, steady, waiting. Neither crossed the line, and somehow that made it worse and better.
The storm broke just before dawn, not with thunder, but with rain, soft at first, then steady, soaking the dust until the earth darkened and drank it in. Boone woke to the sound on the tin roof of the bunkhouse, breath already tight in his chest like it knew where he was meant to be. He didn't fight it this time. By the time the sky lightened, he was riding south again, rain still clinging to his coat, the air cool and clean like something had been washed open. Dry Creek came into view wrapped in mist, the boarding house porch empty but alive with memory. Lenora was already awake. She stood inside the doorway, hair loose down her back, a shawl draped over her shoulders. She looked like a woman who rose early because she trusted the day to meet her. When she saw Boone through the window, she didn't startle. She smiled. "You ride in weather like this on purpose?" she asked as she opened the door. "Didn't feel right staying away," he said simply. "That's honest." He stepped inside, the door closing softly behind him. The house was quiet, everyone else still asleep. The intimacy of it pressed close, heavier than the storm had been. They stood there, facing each other, the space between them familiar now, not a question, a choice. "I've been thinking," he said. Lenora lifted a brow. "That sounds dangerous." "For me," he agreed, "about how I move through the world, about what I take for granted." And about how you don't make room for me," he continued. "You expect me to find my own place." Her expression warmed. "That's because I trust you to." He nodded. "I'm not used to that." "I know." The quiet stretched. Boone's chest rose and fell, steady this time, intentional. "I don't want to be a passing thing. I don't want to be a man who comes and goes because it feels good." Lenora's gaze sharpened, not guarded, but attentive. "Then don't." "I want to choose you," he said. "Not grab, not claim. Choose." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Lenora stepped closer. "So here's the truth," she said quietly. "I want you. I want the way you listen, the way you stop, the way you breathe when you remember you're allowed to." Boone's throat tightened. "But," she continued, "I won't carry your weight for you. I won't make myself smaller so you can feel steady." "I wouldn't ask you to." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." She reached for him then, not tentative, not testing. Her hands rested on his forearms, solid and warm. Boone didn't move except to let his breath slow even further, to let himself be felt. "This is where we start, if we do." Boone nodded once. "Show me." Her lips curved, soft and certain. She leaned in first. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't consuming. It was deliberate, mouth to mouth, breath shared, heat blooming, slow and deep. Boone let himself follow instead of lead, responding to her rhythm, her pace. When they parted, their foreheads rested together. "That," Lenora murmured, "is how you touch me." Boone exhaled, a sound halfway to a laugh. "I can learn." "I know you can." The outside rain softened again, tapering off into quiet drops. The storm had done its work. Lenora stepped back just enough to look at him fully. "You stayed today." It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said. "And tomorrow?" He didn't hesitate. "If you'll have me." She smiled, slow, satisfied, unafraid. She turned toward the kitchen, already moving forward, already trusting him to follow. Boone did, and for the first time in his life, the giant cowboy wasn't trying to be more than he was. He was breathing, and it wasn't driving him crazy anymore. It was grounding him.